All right. End-to-end testing is hard, but it doesn't have to be. I'm Gleb Bahmutov, and I'm here to talk about how you can test your web apps or websites easier. Because I know some of you hate testing web applications, and some of you love web application testing. And this presentation is for both of you. So you can find me online everywhere, and at slides.com/Bahmutov, you'll find this particular set of slides. So yes, I work at Cypress.io. I've been a happy user for a year, and then I joined the company, and I've been there for a year and a half. So what is Cypress? Let me quickly show it to you. It's an Electron-based app that can run your app iframed right here on the right. It's a real application. You can control it. But you also see all the commands that the test ran. You have a time travel and debugger. You can go back and see what the app did. You can stop network and so on. So it's a pretty useful app. And it's so useful that it was actually introduced here at ReactiveConf 2 years ago in Bratislava. So this guy is Brian Mann, who actually wrote Cypress. I just work on it. And this was 2 years ago. And what has changed in 2 years? Well, exactly 1 year ago, we went open source. So everything I'm showing here is completely open source, MIT license, so you don't have to pay anything. As a company, we're working on the tool itself. We're working on a docs. We don't limit you in any way. So it's a really nice tool. And you can kind of tell that right about here, we open source the whole thing. So now it's gaining popularity, right? It's gaining stars. Even this graph is out of date a little bit because we actually got more popular. And as a company, we're working on things that go beyond running tests locally or on CI a single time. Right? We're working on services where you can record things and you can load balance all your tests and all the things that really require a bunch of test runs and not a single test run. So in this talk, I'm going to talk not about the Cypress as a tool, but about some architectural decisions that we have made that might be kind of hard to grasp and usually are becoming obstacles to people using Cypress and maybe become kind of hard to understand. So first thing I want to show are command retries. So actually, the best thing is just to show it live. So I have a test, right? I'm selecting an element with a selector, and then I'm typing, just like a user types. And then I'm typing again and pressing enter. So I'm really adding 4 to-do items. And then I'm making an assertion that there are really 4 to-do items in this list. So again, if I rerun this, it types, and really, there are 4 items in a list. Excellent. But what happens if, for example, my assertion is wrong? What if I added 4 items, but it really expected only 2? So the test fails, but it doesn't fail immediately. Notice that it actually spins for a couple seconds, and then it says, hey, I expected 2 items, but there were 4. So what's happening there? Well, this get is a command. I'm saying, get me all the items that match that selector. And should have length 2 is an assertion. And what Cypress does under the hood, it actually reruns the previous command, the last command, until the assertion passes or times out. And we can see it much better if we actually control this assertion and we set something really, really long. Notice it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning, constantly selecting items, checking if there are 2 items, failing, selecting items again, failing, selecting items again, and so on and so on. And because this is live application, these retries can be helped. So now it actually found 3 items, but it's looking for 2. So it keeps spinning and reevaluating the command, hoping that the assertion would pass. So if I delete 1 item, the test passes. So these command retries are built into every command in Cypress because the web is asynchronous. Nothing happens when you expect it. We had to build this logic into every command because we really wanted the web applications not to fail. So again, we have a command and we have an assertion, and every command will be retried. We have timeouts for every command, which are defaults. We have timeouts for page to load, for network requests to return something. But here's the question. Which command is the last one? Right? Because what happens is that, what if you select a list first? So you get the list element. And then you select li elements. So you say, find li elements. So now you get a reference to those li elements. And then you say, well, there should be two li elements. Last command, assertion. So if something goes wrong, it will be retried, but only the last command, not the whole chain. And so what happens like sometimes with React? It re-renders the whole thing if something changes. So now your reference is actually stale reference, and you keep retrying, but the app is actually doing something else. Well, luckily, it's really easy to fix. You just combine your selectors. You don't work in steps. You make the command actually more meaningful. Similarly, you can actually expose during tests your app code, right, by setting a global variable. And then it's really easy from Cypress because it runs right next to your code. It runs in the browser. Your app is just iframe next to it. You can point the Cypress test at a window, grab the app global variable, grab store, no $store property, grab its property items, and you assume that there should be, or check that there are really two items in that list. But you see how you kind of nested those things, and you're only going to retry the last one. But maybe the app isn't ready yet. Maybe the store has been overwritten. Maybe the store hasn't been initialized yet. If you grab the reference too early, you're never going to retry that particular command. You're only going to keep searching for items in an object that's no longer valid. So luckily, we implement a bunch of things like getting a deeply nested property using low-get. So you get the whole thing in one shot. So no matter when your app is initialized, no matter when your state is initialized, you're going to rerun the whole thing, the whole getter, and really check for items without getting a stale reference. But then there is a problem. What if you don't use our commands and you implement your own callback using then? Right? So you get something with a custom logic. You really want to return a promise, make it asynchronous callback. But in that case, we don't retry it, because we don't know what you're doing inside then. Are we allowed to retry it? Or maybe you're doing something destructive. But it's really easy if you have a promise returning logic, like throwing a dice, to bring completely third-party library that can retry promise returning function based with parameters like retry it every, well, it's 100 milliseconds, using off-the-shelf retry logic. And then you can put it inside Cypress test. And now we're not retrying it, but you're retrying your own callback on your own terms. And it's easy to do. You can even bring logic from other testing tools like Big Test. So Big Test has this nice utility called convergence, where it's easy to define, like, rerun this function until it stabilizes and gives me a passing condition. And you can easily put that logic inside the Cypress test to do your own retries. So I think the design between making every command retryable by default is, for end-to-end, is a crucial decision. Otherwise, you run a test and things are never ready when you think they're ready. And you always have to hard code, wait for 30 seconds just to be sure. With this, the test can run as fast as possible without unnecessary waits. But how did it feel, right? If you're writing end-to-end tests with Cypress, if you have just starting with it. So your application runs inside an iframe right next to your tests. Your tests are actually running in a real browser. I feel like this. I feel I'm not working with black box. I can observe the object I'm manipulating through the glass. I'm well protected, right? Because the tests, right, can see the code, but the app has no idea what's going on. And if you ever been to a lab that has those like gloves, once we turn them off, they're like really fun. You can high-five them all. OK, when I'm testing application in Cypress, end-to-end tests operate the app through the DOM. Right? Nothing is framework specific. We're only using well-documented, stable browser API like DOM, network, local storage, IndexedDB, cookies. Which means Cypress is framework agnostic. It doesn't care if you're running Elm, Closure, Vue app, React app. It only goes through public APIs, but probably will not change. Which means that if you write your end-to-end test once, you can change the implementation under the hood without breaking anything. So if you have a GSP application, but you always want to rewrite, but nobody wrote end-to-end test for it, well, you can quickly throw end-to-end tests, rewrite the whole thing to be modern stack, and no one will know, because you've never broken any end-to-end tests. But that's fine for browser APIs, because the tests run in a browser. But what about the rest of the system? How do you test? Actually check that database has been updated correctly, or your file system has been updated correctly. Other frameworks, they run in Node directly, so they can have full access to the file system, to the databases, without doing anything, because they run on Node. So we implemented a way for your browser task to jump back to the Node context, and it's called sitetask. Inside the browser, you have sitetask command. You say the name of a task that you want to run, and you pass arguments. And it goes to the Node backend that Cypress run in, and where you register a callback by name. And then you compute and return result back to your test, so the test can pass, fail, or continue. So it looks like this. Imagine you modifying, you're adding a new to-do. You go through the DOM. But then you want to check if the database actually has saved a new record. All the way through your application stack, all the way to the database, you really want to check the database. So you say sitetask and the name of the task. And inside the Node backend code that you can add to Cypress, you have just event callback. In this case, task. And it kind of looks like this in a terminal. The spinner spins until the database actually gets updated. You can use your retry logic that I described before. And as soon as the record is saved, the task finishes and your task can continue. And if you're looking for a wrong record, it just keeps checking and checking until it actually fails and times out. And to compare ourselves with other tools, the other tools are trying to go from a Node context by throwing code into the browser. The browser is a very complex thing. It's hard for you to throw something and expect it to catch it. The browser is doing a lot of stuff, rendering, controlling network, working with different contexts, with service workers, and so on. But Node, in comparison, is very, very simple. So when you do WebDriver execute, you're sending actual code from Node to the browser. The browser will have, I might execute it correctly, or there's something might be wrong. There's no idea what to do. When you go with sitetask, you're going from a browser to Node, which is much, much simpler process. Node is specifically done to do that, where you just call an event. An event handler just picks it up and returns the result. So we have sitetask to go to the Node. You can execute arbitrary program, or you can do HTTP requests. Great. But still looks different, right? Even people who like Cypress kind of publish things like this. But Cypress has a very bizarre syntax. Here's an example. Sci-visit URL, sci-get awesome selector, click. Sci-URL should include a new URL. Well, to me, this is very, very obvious and very declarative. But if you compare to other frameworks that have async await, it's completely different. So here's a Puppeteer example. There are more await and async keywords than actual keywords here. You can look at Testcafe, the same thing. So the Cypress, really, if you think about sci variable that we give to you, it usually should be called a user. A user visits a URL. A user gets a selector and clicks on it. A user looks at URL and checks that it contains a new URL. Think of it that way. And this kind of shows our perspective on running tests. You're not running the test immediately. That's why you cannot use async await. Instead, when Cypress sees visit, it actually adds a command in its queue. When it sees sci-get, it adds another command and links it to the first one in its queue. When you say click, you're adding a thing into the queue. And so on. And the assertion is added to the queue. And this is ultimately the principal difference between Cypress and any other tool there. Because you get, at the end of the day, a single command queue, but hasn't run yet. It just defines all the things that the test will do. And it's like a single path, because when a user tests your software, a user cannot do a bunch of stuff at the same time. No, you might click very fast, but you're still doing one thing. You open a page and you wait for page to load. You open a page and you wait for selector to be visible, and so you can type into it, and so on. This queue is always deterministic. And that's what guarantees that the tests are repeatable and not flaky, because you're not executing different things. You don't have race conditions. And finally, the queue is lazy, like I'm lazy, right? It hasn't run yet. You have to explicitly start the test for this queue to start processing. Before, we just build it. And this gives us an execution model where we can start with a command. If it passes, we go to the second command. If it passes, we go to the third command. If it fails, we actually know exactly where it failed, and we can show you, here's what failed, here are all the commands that ran, how they ran, and all the commands that are following. So you precisely know where this big test failed. And also, like I showed, with this execution model, we can always go back to the previous command and rerun it until the assertion passes. You cannot do it with promises, because promises are fulfilled once, and then they're done, like a single-shot bullet. So that's why you cannot do things that people usually are trying to do, that means await sci-URL, because nothing will run there. You're just building the queue when you execute the test. If I can use an analogy, is that this old game of pipes. In that game, you arrange little pipes, and then you turn the water, and the water starts flowing. Similar for us, when you build the queue, then you start the test, and the water starts flowing, meaning the test starts executing commands, and if the water reaches all the way to the bottom, that means the test has passed. Even better is to think of this as reactive stream. We are at ReactiveConf conference, so of course I had to explain it in terms of reactive streams. When you do reactive stream, like using RxJS library, let's say with a pipe, you're adding filter, you're adding map, you're adding scan. When you run that code, it defines a pipeline, a reactive stream. But that stream just stays there dry. Nothing is running. In order for it to start running, and in order for it to start generating events, doing mapping, filtering, and so on, someone has to click or execute subscribe. Before anyone does subscribe, that stream can just stay there without any events flowing. It will be like function, but never gets executed, just defined. So when the test starts, we do the same thing. Just like events start flowing through reactive pipeline, our commands start executing, retrying, and so on. And if events finish subscribe, that means you finished, you went through the whole reactive stream, and you actually reached pipeline. So writing Cypress test is almost like writing a single reactive stream, where you flat map latest every operation, and you take only one event. A command passes, and you continue. OK, so now something personal. A lot of users ask us, well, is Cypress the end of Selenium? Is Cypress better than Nightwatch, right? Should I use WebDriver, or should I just replace all my tests? And we think, we never try to avoid this conversation, because we never think that our tool is a replacement for another tool. Okay? We think that every tool has been written by its authors to solve a specific problem from a specific point of view. Right? There is no sense in saying our tool is better than your tool, because, well, you probably wrote your tool to solve your problem. We're trying to overcome our shortcomings, but we know by using your tool. So we actually benefit from your tool being written, maintained, explained. There is plenty of room to create a bunch of tools. And if we look at this pie, so imagine this piece are all the people using Selenium and WebDriver. It's a significant chunk. Selenium is #1. We want to be this chunk, right? A very sizable slice of a pie where people will start using Cypress. But there is a huge pie of people who are not writing any end-to-end tests. That's real market that we're trying to capture. We're trying to make it so simple for you to try Cypress But we're not taking share from Selenium. We're not competing with Selenium. We'll be happy when people use Selenium and Cypress, and we split the whole pie. Right? Just do npm install and try Cypress. And finally, I want to finish with something else. So people like customizing. I used to have a Honda Civic, and I added a spoiler. And it looked ridiculous, because it's a crappy car, but it looked cool. People love IKEA furniture, not because it's a great furniture, but because it's cheap, and you assemble it yourself, so you feel proud, right? And a real example is Hyper-Terminal from Zeit. Not because it customizes, and replaces the fast terminal with a slow Electron application, no. The real power is because you can customize it yourself by knowing just JavaScript. So people write things like awesome hyper, where you turn this mode, and all of a sudden you type, and you power move everywhere, right? That's the power of taking a tool and making it your tool. So what can we do? Well, as I told you, your tests are running right inside the browser, right next to the application under test. So what can you do? Well, anytime you run something in an iframe, you can just say, hey, give me my parent reference. And all of a sudden, you get a reference to the whole window, to the whole browser window. And you're a browser developer. You're a front-end developer trying to test code. And now you have access to the browser. You're like, so what can I do? Well, why not just load some styles before the tests start? I mean, you running in a browser, so what does it do? So I have my app right here, and let me remove this stuff, right? We don't need it. We can do this thing. By the way, so Cypress always watches my files, runs. So I'm going to require another module. And all of a sudden, it switched to, let me just scroll, to Halloween theme. I didn't ask Cypress to actually, hey, expose hooks, expose new theme. No, it runs in the browser. My code, can just change everything. And the cool thing you can do is also, if a test fails, okay, spinning. I mean, it's silly, but okay. So I don't care about, it's too short of a talk to go through the summary of what I just showed, right? My only conclusion, or my only parting thought is, keep creating new tools. People have this thing, oh, JavaScript, new framework, new tool every day. But it's fine. Ask Java developers, would you be happy with one new tool every month? They'll be like, yeah, right? We have this unique thing where we have new toys, new solutions, even to old problems or new problems, but appear constantly, right? If we were happy with the state of things, we would never have written Cypress. Or if we were happy with Cypress, how it was a year ago, we would never actually release new versions. Keep pumping new stuff, right? Don't never stop. Well, you can find slides online, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gleb. All right, we've got a few questions for you. No, we don't.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Some tests need specific processes to be launched and killed after testing.
That's strong language.
Isn't it just? So let's keep the violence to a minimum today, guys. Databases, services, etc. How would you achieve that?
Right. So we suggest that you start your server before you start your tests, right? So don't run long-running process from side task. Create your services, start them, and then start your test, and then finish everything.
Does Cypress work with React Native?
So React Native is an interesting thing. I know people have done where they took the part that's just the web application, and before they convert to React Native, they run end-to-end tests in Cypress against that in a browser. But once you convert, we don't support native platforms, so we cannot run the test on a converted app. While you're thinking about this, Slido that you use here uses Cypress for testing, so they are a big friend. Okay.
Let's increase that slice of the pie. Can Cypress handle auth login?
Yes, but not in a way you expect, right? It's OAuth is outside of your control, right? So for every OAuth, if you can do SI request, HTTP request to log in, and then you get a cookie or a token and then use it, it's much better than trying to pop a browser, pop OAuth, enter information, and go for the DOM, right? It's much better to do a SI request, HTTP request, and be logged in right away.
Next one, any roadmaps for Cypress?
Absolutely. If you go to the GitHub, there is a roadmap, there is changelog. It's an open source project, so we're discussing everything what we want to work on very, very publicly. Because we don't have to make money of a test runner, the money and price doesn't really influence our decision. The impact, that's how we decide which things we should prioritize.
Gabor, can Sci handle non- or mobile testing, for example, iOS, Safari?
Excellent. So right now, we can control only Chrome-based browser, like Chrome, Electron. We're working on other browsers, like Firefox and IE11. After we do that, we want to do Safari Mobile, right? And then you'll be able to run Cypress against Safari Mobile.
Gabor again, getting a bit greedy with the questions. Can Cypress test non-DOM, canvas-based web app?
So, what kind of testing do you think, the canvas should do, right? I'll be willing, to discuss this. Right now, there are other companies that do screenshot diffing. So with Cypress, you can do screenshots, and then use third-party software to do screenshot diffings to compare how your canvas looks, for example. But it's a more specific case, and I would be very happy to discuss this.
All right, our next question. Are you actually changing the actual code by test? If yes, is it not dangerous the way how the code should be tested?
Well, I love living dangerously, of course, right? Yes, you can always reach inside your code and stop spy application code. A very useful example is stopping math random, so your IDs that you generate are actually what you expect, and that are very easy to use inside the test and compare against. So the test becomes deterministic. So in that case, it's a judgment call that comes from your experience. Should you spy on your application code, or is it about to change so the test will all be broken? It's, there are trade-offs.
You're looking at me like I understand what you're saying. I feel like we're two different species here. I'm going to go home and have a very long cry. All right, maybe last question. This thing is displaying all sorts of strange numbers. I don't know how much time we have. Any estimate for the fetch support on Cypress?
OK, you don't need fetch support. I mean, come on. We have so many workarounds to replace fetch with XHR, which you can spy and stop. No, I will not give you any estimate.
Oh, yeah. Good, Gleb. What about Firefox support? OK.
We're almost done with Firefox support. And then we look at number of hacks we had to do to get it working. And we're like, it's not going to scale to any other browser. So we actually scraped whatever we implemented. And then we're going to do IE and Firefox, hopefully soon. No timetable.
All right. And our final question. Can Sci run automatically on a server and give results back to an automatic deployment workflow?
Absolutely. Every CI we have examples. We have Docker images. So you can do just install Cypress run, and it runs on CI without problems.
Fantastic. All right, let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.